Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Who would have thought that the birth of my first grandchild would lead to the possible destruction of my 24-year marriage to Jane? I'm sitting in the back seat of a rented company van, just down the street from my daughter's house. Hopefully, what happens next won't put an end to what I thought was a very loving and wonderful marriage. According to my daughter Sarah, Jane usually goes for a long run around noon on the days when she visits her grandson. Sarah says Jane returns in about an hour and looks pretty flushed after her workout. I'm here to see what Jane's workout consists of. My name is Bill Jones, and a month ago I was living a dream. My business is booming, I am 47 years old, and I am the co-owner of a manufacturing plant that is on the verge of obtaining a new patent that will revolutionize one of the plastic extrusion processes. If everything goes according to plan, I will earn several million on the patent even after I share the profits with my co-inventor and the 5 investors who supported our development. Apart from my job, I thought my personal life was all I could dream of. As I said, my wife seemed to love me and our life together. We have one child, Sarah, whom we are both very proud to call our daughter. Sarah met, got married, and got pregnant by a wonderful man 10 years older than her right after graduating from university. The funny thing about Sarah is how easily she became a full-time mother and housewife. Here is a girl, actually a woman, but she will always be my girl, who graduated from high school with honors and was determined to take the financial world by storm. Sarah's graduation gift from her mom and me was a 6-week tour of Europe. It was her reward for graduating from college in 3 years, saving us a lot of money, cheering herself up while most of her peers spent spring and summer vacations at the beach. Sarah met her future husband in Europe. She claims it was love at first sight, something she hadn't thought possible until that first night in Madrid. She also claims that it was fate. Jim Taylor was from Jane Olympia's hometown. When Sarah returned from her European tour, she moved into her grandparents' house, Jane's parents, and 6 months later she was engaged to Jim, and 18 months later she got married and became pregnant with our first grandson. Jane couldn't be more excited. She immediately cut her hours at work to spend time with Sarah and the baby. So now you know that my working life is wonderful and I am a very happy dad-grandfather-in-law. This brings us to my marriage to Jane. Jane and I met at the University of Washington. I was in high school, and Jane transferred here from Washington State. We had shared classes, one of those required for higher education. Jane was, and remains, a very attractive woman. Her height is 170 centimeters, athletic build. She has been running since high school. She has an amazing smile and beautiful brown eyes. I was smitten the first day I saw her, but our few conversations after class made me back off as she seemed restrained. By the end of the quarter, I had plucked up enough courage, and she accepted my invitation to go out. One date led to another, and everything was going well for a long-term romance. I found out the reason for her refusal after our 3rd or 4th date. She was going through a very difficult breakup. Jane caught a guy she dated for 2 years in high school and 2 years at university in bed with another girl. Jane humiliated herself by accepting his infidelities for almost 3 months before finally giving him an ultimatum. He had to choose. By this time, this guy was quite self-confident and frankly chose both, offering a threesome option. Jane had had enough. Soon after, she dropped out of school and transferred to university. I think it led me to romance. This topic seemed to sting Jane, and she never brought it up again. I am quite sure that Jane and I had a pretty good marriage and that she was a faithful, loving wife for the next 23 years. Although there were minor disagreements from time to time, we never went to bed without solving these problems and at least kissing each other goodnight. I've never lost my way. Of course, I've looked in sometimes, but I've never been tempted to ruin something good by crossing that line. Jane caught me staring at a woman on the beach or on the dance floor from time to time. She patted me lightly on the shoulder and said, "Remember, you can look, but not for too long, and never touch." She always did it with a smile and a twinkle in her eyes. So, what happened? When Sarah's son William was born, yes, named after me, Jane decided that she needed to spend time with Sarah and Bill Jr., as we call him. Once a week, Jane would get in her car and drive 100 kilometers from our house in North Seattle to Olympia. It's not far by mileage, but anyone who has traveled this section knows that the road from point A to point B takes hours. After a couple of months of driving back and forth on the same day, and with winter approaching, Sarah bought a couch and put it in their office so Jane could spend the night. Jane could drive south on the morning of the first day and return home before rush hour on the second. I used the evenings when Jane was not at home to work on the patent. This new arrangement worked so well that Jane continued to stay overnight at Olympia even after the weather improved the following spring. On Saturday, June 27th, Bill Jr. had his first birthday. Sarah and Jim planned to have a party at a bar in their large backyard to celebrate the occasion. Two minor incidents occurred during the picnic, and both played a role in putting the pieces of this mystery together. I was sitting in a cozy lounge chair and drinking a cold beer when Jim and Sarah joined me. They noticed that I was staring at Jane. Jim spoke first. "You're a lucky man, Dad. I have to admit that I followed my father's advice and looked at Sarah's mother to see what my future wife would look like when she turns 40 before proposing." Sarah slapped him on the shoulder, just like her mom always did to me. "You're a pig. I can't believe you can say that. What if my mother hadn't been such a baby? Would you leave me?" I was trying to save Jim. "It's true, Sarah. I did the same thing. One look at your grandmother convinced me that your mother was an angel." With that, Sarah slapped me on the shoulder. "Okay, Dad, but what are we girls supposed to do? Look at your fathers?" In this case, I prefer to look at a shiny bald spot. The three of us looked at Jim's father, who works at the bar, and laughed. Jim's father is a great guy and handsome, but he struggles with male pattern baldness by growing his hair and trying to comb it. Right now, the wind was blowing him around, and he looked like a future president. "Well, anyway, you're right, Jim. I'm a lucky guy. How many men are married to a 45-year-old woman who has the body of a 30-year-old? Sarah replied. "She should be in good shape, considering how much she runs. Every day when she's here, Mom leaves at noon and spends at least an hour jogging to the waterfront and back. I do not know how she does it. Yes, she runs at home at least 4 days a week. Once or twice a week, I go outside with her, and she chases me with all her might. She runs 6 kilometers at a 7-minute pace. I think she's going to try running a half marathon this fall. You have to give her credit." Around this time, Jeff, Jim's father, called everyone together and began serving grilled corn on the cob and burgers, including surprisingly delicious vegetarian burgers. The first ones I've ever tried. I was sitting with Jeff and Jim. We compared the work notes. Jeff had a restaurant supply business, and he was grooming Jim to take over when it came time to retire in 10 years or so. After eating, I went inside to get a couple beers for the three of us, and just before I went out the door to the patio, something caught my attention in the house behind Jim and Sarah. I took a step back into the house and focused my eyes. Of course, Jim and Sarah's neighbor in the backyard was standing at the top floor window and looking into our yard with binoculars. I couldn't say for sure, but it seemed to me that he was watching the table where Jane, Sarah, and Jim's mom were sitting. It's creepy. When I returned through the door to the patio, the neighbor quickly lowered the binoculars and moved away from the window. "Jim, what happened to the neighbor behind you? I just saw him looking through binoculars here." Both Jim and Jeff took their beers and looked at me as if they were asking, "What the hell?" "This is Alan Ross. He's actually a salesman for one of our main suppliers, and this guy gives me goosebumps. We had a neighborhood watch party last year, and even though the guy doesn't live on our block, he showed up. It seemed a little strange to everyone. I caught him staring at Sarah more than once, so I went over and talked to him. Of course, he recognized me, was surprised that we were neighbors, and apologized. He said Sarah reminded him of someone he knew from high school. I accepted it, but it was weird. Well, I hope you keep the curtains in your back bedroom closed." What a jerk. But something about it rang in my head. It was a long day, and by the time Jane and I went home, I had forgotten about the children's neighbor. I only remembered on Sunday morning. Jane was on one of her runs, and I was having my second cup of coffee, so I went to the bookcase and pulled out one of Jane's school yearbooks. We keep all these nostalgic things together with photo albums in the study. I searched for the name Alan Ross, and to my great surprise, there was a handwritten note in the margin. "It's been 2 wonderful years with you, and as your favorite song says, we've just started. I'm looking forward to next year at WSU and all the years to come. Your eternal love." So it was Jane's ex-boyfriend who lived right behind Sarah and Jim. Did she know? If she knew, why didn't she say anything? These and dozens of other questions were running through my head until Jane came home and took a shower. By the time she came downstairs, I had already prepared a fruit and yogurt smoothie. As usual, Jane looked so fresh, flushed, and radiant. She looked so beautiful that I almost chickened out, but I held my breath and asked the million-dollar question. "Jane, do you know a certain Alan Ross?" Jane's response was so smooth. Looking back, it seems that she almost anticipated this question and was ready for the answer. "I knew Alan Ross in high school. We even dated for a while. Why are you asking?" Jane's answer took me by surprise, and I decided to play the rest of the hand out in the open. "He lives behind Sarah and Jim." When Jim noticed Ross looking at Sarah, he called out to him, and Ross said she reminded him of a girl he knew in high school. "Considering how much Sarah looks like you at that age, I wondered if you were the girl he was talking about." "Maybe, but why talk about it? Something happened?" "Not really, but I think I saw him watching us from his house yesterday. It just seemed a little weird, that's all." Then events cascaded down to this moment, when I was sitting in this rented van. First of all, the next time I went into the office, Jane's senior yearbook was no longer on the shelf. It was like a punch in the stomach. I had to sit down in my leather armchair and catch my breath. What the hell is going on? That's when Sarah's comment at lunch yesterday popped into my head. "Every day Mom goes for an hour to run." The consequences were too terrible to think about. Is my Jane with another man? Should I confront Jane? Should I talk to Sarah? Or maybe hire a private investigator? I remember reading something where someone asked a question. You have to ask yourself, would you be better off without her? I didn't think I could stand Jane cheating, but would I divorce her? That was a question I couldn't answer that evening, especially with the little information I had. I went upstairs, took a sleeping pill, and went to bed. I don't even remember if I kissed Jane goodnight, but I must have, because she didn't talk about it at breakfast on Monday. The next 2 days at work were too hectic to think about my personal problems. Our investors were in town on Monday and Tuesday to schedule our progress on the patent. It would be impossible to answer their questions and at the same time try to develop a plan of action related to my marriage. I would have plenty of time when the investors leave on Tuesday afternoon. I accepted it and got to work. Late Tuesday afternoon, I dropped off the investors at SeaTac. On my way home, I called Jane on her cell phone. She spent Tuesday and Wednesday at Sarah's. When Jane didn't answer the phone, I called Sarah. "Sarah, hi. I tried to call your mom, but she didn't answer the phone. Is she there?" "No, Dad. Mom went to Cindy Sullivan's tonight. I think she's Mom's former classmate. It's funny that she's never talked about it before. Is Cindy's party a regular thing?" "Irregularly. Maybe once every few weeks she goes and meets with someone she knew when she lived here. She usually gets home by 10, unless she drinks too much wine and stays the night. Mom says it's always nice to get together with the women she grew up with. She says she still feels closer to small-town girls than to Seattle women. Having lived here in Olympia for the last 3 years, I can understand her point of view. Yes, it's a pity that your mom was never really liked by Nordstrom fans. She was always more comfortable in jeans and boots. Maybe when I retire, we can do it. Do it soon, Dad. Jim and I are planning to have more children, and it would be great if all 4 of their grandparents lived nearby. Sarah, you never cease to amaze me. I never imagined that my ambitious little breadwinner would talk about having a bunch of kids. I just found the guy of my dreams and discovered that I like being a mom. You and Mom can take most of the blame on yourself." "All right, Sarah. I'm already on the road. It's a good night, and I think I'll hop on a Harley and take a long ride this evening. Tell your mom that I won't answer the phone because I'm on a motorcycle. Good night." "Good night, Dad. Drive safely." It was a good night for a walk, and I've mapped out a destination for tonight's trip. By the time I arrived at Alan Ross's house, it was already dark. There was just enough light so that, as I drove slowly past his house, I saw a red Mustang Boss 429 in the driveway in front of the 2-car garage and no sign of Jane's Volvo. I was almost ready to turn on the gas when something made me stop. The license plate was one of those that were sold by the state for a lot of money. The license plate had the WSU Cougar logo on it, and the license number was Ross Boss. Why would a guy park his expensive sports car in the driveway instead of in the garage? I drove a block and a half down the street to the school. In front of her was one of those circular driveways for school buses. I parked the bike and pretended to repair the Harley, removing the seat just in case. I was keeping an eye on Ross's house, pretending to be distracted. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way either. Olympia is still a small enough town for a guy on a motorcycle to attract attention. Half an hour later, a policeman stopped nearby. "Do you need anything?" "Not really, but thanks for asking, officer." I thought that maybe I had a short circuit in the electrical system, but it turned out that the last mechanic had not tightened the negative wire on the battery. "I'm just finishing up and I'll be leaving in 10 minutes. I tried to look the officer in the eye as we chatted. "What are you going to do if it doesn't fix anything?" "My daughter and her husband live on the third. I'm just going to walk there. But I think I can do it. Thanks again." The policeman drove away, but I saw him driving a few streets away when I put on my helmet. The bike was turned on and the headlights were on, so he left me alone. It was already very dark, and Ross's Mustang was not moving. The next stage promised to be difficult and, perhaps, more than awkward if I make a mistake and get caught. I headed for Ross's house with enough speed to turn off the engine and drive up to the front of his house. I stopped the bike, ran down the driveway, and had to stand on tiptoe to look inside the garage through the windows at the top of the garage door. On the right was a Mercedes S-Class convertible, and on the left was my wife's Volvo. I do not know how I did it. Maybe the last 3 days made me believe that I would find exactly what I found, and it wasn't such a big surprise. But I had the presence of mind to go back to the Harley, start it up, and take off like a bat from hell. I drove for 20 minutes, stopped at a tavern near the military base, and took out my cell phone. Jane answered the phone this time. "Hi, Bill. Sarah said you were riding today. Are you at home?" "Almost. What about you? What are you up to?" "I'm at Cindy Sullivan's, an old friend from elementary and high school. I think I'll end up spending the night here. I've had a couple of glasses of wine and I think I've exceeded the limit. I feel fine. I just don't want to take any chances." "That's a good idea. Listen, I needed to talk to you tonight because the investor meeting ran into a couple of problems. I'm leaving tomorrow and won't be back until everything is sorted out. I'm sorry to dump this on you at the last minute." "Oh, Bill, I'm going to miss you. If you're out of town, is it okay if I stay here in Olympia until you get back? You know how much I hate being home alone." "No, you go and stay with Sarah. I'll warn you before you fly home. It should be Saturday at the latest. Bye." "Bye, Bill. I love you." Damn, why did she have to go and say that? It only made her betrayal worse. Of course, I wasn't really going to leave town. I just didn't want to deal with Jane while I was settling in for the rest of my life. I was driving home, trying to look at everything with bleary eyes. I don't think I'm a weakling, but I'm not ashamed to say that a few tears spilled and a lot of curses fell from my lips when I thought about the 25 years I spent with the woman I loved more than myself, the mother of my daughter and the grandmother of our beautiful grandson. I wondered if my life would ever be happy again. On Wednesday, I called my business partner, explained the situation, and told him that I would be away for a few days. He was sympathetic and said the usual nice words of condolence, but deep down he was probably thinking about how this would affect our deal. I can't say I blame him if that's really what was on his mind. We were so close to making a small fortune, and now I'm dumping everything on him. Then a call to our lawyer for a recommendation from a divorce lawyer to make sure he knows it has to be a very good lawyer, maybe the best. There's no way I would share millions with a cheating fool who might end up with an asshole spending my money on cars and all that. The lawyer I was referred to understood the urgency of the situation and agreed to meet with me that evening at his office. He was outspoken about it. I could have counted on paying him a hefty premium for an after-hours meeting to clear his calendar and speed up paperwork, but he assured me it would be worth my money. I checked into a local hotel, just in case she was talking to a neighbor, and called Jane at noon. Of course, she didn't answer. Whether she was actually running or jumping on Ross's bones at that moment didn't matter. I just wanted to avoid any conversation. I left her a message that I would be busy with meetings, but I would call her in the evening. When I met with the lawyer that evening, he took matters into his own hands. Obviously, this is not the first time he has had to deal with such a situation. He listened to my story of grief and my desire to move forward without risking a scalp. He said that the documents would be ready by Friday morning and gave me a checklist of how to break up. The accounts need to be closed, the goods marked, how I would like to notify Jane, etc., etc. When he heard about my plan to give Jane the divorce papers, he started shaking his head. I assured him that I could do it without going to jail. He said he still doesn't recommend it, but he can understand my motivation. Just don't be stupid. On Thursday, I looked at the checklist. One credit card remained open, the one Jane had, but the credit line was reduced from $30,000 to $10,000. We paid off the balance every month, so there was no great danger that it would alert Jane before the day of reckoning. On Friday at 8 a.m., I was sitting in the lawyer's waiting room. He almost smiled as he walked through the door. He went straight to his desk and handed me an envelope with my name written on it. I signed where I needed to, and he reminded me when I walked out the door. "Remember," I said, "don't be a fool." On my way south to Olympia, I stopped at the car rental office at SeaTac and drove off in a white company van. Here I am sitting a block from Alan Ross's house, on the farthest side from the school. I didn't want to be mistaken for a pervert, and I'm waiting to see if the day will come when my marriage will fall apart forever. At 11:45, Jane comes around the corner, dressed in a gym uniform. She goes to Ross's house, climbs the steps, puts her hand under the planters and walks through the door as if it were her house. At 11:55 a.m., Alan Ross pulls up in his Mercedes and parks in the garage. At 11:56, I drive the van to Sarah's house. Sarah is surprised to see me, but not as much as when I tell her why I'm here. I tried to tell her in a way that wouldn't shock her, but it's probably unrealistic. I asked her to call her husband Jim and meet us at home as soon as he could leave. I knew that when it was over, Sarah would need Jim's strength. "No, Dad, no. It just can't be true. Mom loves you. She would never cheat on you, and I can't be that stupid. If she was cheating, I would know. You must have misunderstood everything. Sarah, I'd give anything for that to be untrue. I've loved your mother for over 25 years. Heck, we were going to celebrate our 25th anniversary next year. But let me tell you what I saw." I told Sarah all the evidence I had at the moment. Sarah still refused to believe it. We picked Bill Jr. up from his crib, drove Sarah's car with Jr. in the car seat around the corner, and parked in front of Alan Ross's house. Sarah stayed in the car, and I went to the front door with a thick paper envelope. I had to ring and knock before that asshole in the bathrobe opened the door. "Who the hell are you?" said a nice guy. "I'm Jane's husband. Could you please call her to come to the door? I want to talk to her." He stood with his mouth open. He tried to slam the door, but I was ready for it and put my foot against the jamb. It hurt like hell, but I kept the door open. I pushed it open with my shoulder and shouted inside, "Jane, come here right now." Ross kept pushing on the door, but it didn't do him any good, because now my torso was in the way. I kept shouting for Jane to come to the door. I don't know how, but I kept my cool and didn't threaten either Ross or Jane. But I kept yelling for her to come to the door. When Jane finally showed up, she was wearing her gym uniform again. I'm guessing she was naked when Ross opened the door. She had a scared look in those eyes that I loved. "Bill, what's going on? Why are you here?" "That's not a real question, Jane. The real question is, why are you here?" I took this opportunity to grab Ross by the lapel of his robe and pull it open. He was naked under the robe, of course. Jane was looking past me at that moment. The three of us were still standing in the doorway. I turned around and saw what Jane was staring at. Sarah got out of her car and watched the entire episode. "Did you have to bring our daughter? This fool is mad at me." "No, she wanted to come because she said that her mother could not change our marriage in any way. She couldn't wait to prove that it was all a figment of my imagination. And you can be mad at me all you want, but I didn't start this mess, you did." I was starting to lose my temper, so I needed to back off immediately. I handed Jane a manila envelope. She touched it as if I had handed her a live grenade, only in my dreams. "I'm staying with Jim and Sarah for the night. You can stay with your long-lost boyfriend. Read the documents, hire a lawyer, and don't come home until you understand what's in these papers and you can't comply with the terms. I'll have Jim bring your suitcase and personal items from their house. I do not know what Sarah and Jim are going to do next. It is their decision. But you and I are getting a divorce. Goodbye, Jane." I turned and walked away. I thought I heard Jane scream, but Ross slammed the door too hard to tell for sure. "Dad, I'm so sorry. You'd better take us back home. I don't think I can do it." Sarah practically collapsed into my arms when I opened the passenger door for her. Although my life was terrible from that moment and in the months that followed, I don't think it was anything compared to how much worse it was for Jane. Jim was shocked when he was told about Jane and Alan Ross. He was so angry that for several months he refused to let Jane into their house or let her see her grandson. Sarah didn't argue with Jim. If Jim was angry, Sarah was furious. I was at their house when Jane called Sarah to talk. Sarah, in fact, called her own mother everything but a cheater and told Jane that she might never forgive her for breaking her father's heart. Ross lost Taylor's account and, thanks to Jeff Taylor's call to Ross's boss, eventually lost his job. Ross blamed Jane for his bad luck and eventually kicked her out of his house. Jane moved in with her parents. Sarah later told me that Jane's mother and father were unhappy with the situation, but understood that Jane did not have many alternatives until the divorce and financial settlement were finalized. The divorce was finalized within 6 months. My legal team made sure that Jane would get nothing from the patent sale. They were able to protect almost all the money because the patent was sold to a foreign company, and my share was placed in an offshore trust. Don't ask me how. All I know is that it cost me 6 figures to make it work, but it kept the money from falling into Jane's hands. She really got a lot. Half of the sale of our house, half of our savings, but far from millions. Shortly after the divorce, I did receive a letter from Jane, but it did not explain why she cheated. Maybe her excuses made sense to her, but not to me. It contained the usual excuses: an empty nest, a feeling of loneliness, a need for intimacy with Ross, even after all these years. What the letter didn't explain was why she jeopardized what I thought was a great marriage, just for such shitty reasons. Jane reacted badly to her new reality. The breakup of her marriage, the breakup with Sarah and Bill Jr., and, finally, the second breakup with Ross. Her behavior became erratic. She started drinking and kept going downhill. Jane eventually went to rehab at the insistence of her parents. I suppose most abandoned husbands would take some pleasure in seeing their ex-wife get what she deserves, and there are times when a slight smile appears on my lips at the thought of her suffering. But let's face it, I've loved this woman for so many years. I've been trying to protect her from pain for so many years. How could I just stop caring about her? I thank God for the support I have received from my children. I may have felt bad about destroying my ex-wife, but I didn't have any remorse about what I did to Ross. I laughed at a couple of Jim's actions even after his father fired Ross. One evening, Jim looked over the fence and saw Ross having fun with a young woman. Jim went up to the fence, called the woman over, and asked her how she felt talking to a guy who used a married woman and then dumped her when the woman needed him. Jim laughed when the woman came out through the side gate. He watched as Ross came out of his back door with 2 glasses of wine in his hands and looked around the yard in search of his companion. Jim did the same thing a few weeks later when Ross was entertaining a group of friends in his backyard. Jim stood at the fence and asked the group what they thought of their scumbag friend. But the last straw for Ross was a month later, when I helped the children with their move to a new home. Sarah had to leave Ross, and they needed a bigger place, since Sarah was pregnant again. Ross was in the backyard mowing his lawn. I told Jim to wait a couple of minutes, then start recording the scene on his smartphone, but I made sure to cover the microphone with my thumb. I jumped over the fence and started talking quietly to Ross. I said a few things to piss him off. Ross was so angry that he took the bait. Jim caught it on video. I was standing with my hands at my sides when Ross struck the first blow. I was ready for this and ducked so much that I only got a cut. My first roundhouse kick hit Ross right in the nose. The sound of crunching in his nose and the sight of blood made my heart beat faster. The second backhand hit Ross in the solar plexus. Ross doubled over and started vomiting. I had to step back quickly to avoid getting my shoes dirty with his bile. When he bent over, puking, I grabbed his ear, twisted it to hell and whispered, "You won't be so lucky next time. You're going to get seriously hurt next time." Ross was still doubled over when I left his yard through the front door. Somehow his Mercedes started up, childishly, I know, but at that moment it just seemed right. I immediately went to the police station with Jim. My story was that Ross invited me to his yard. I thought it was to apologize, but when I got there, Ross took a swing at me, and I just defended myself. Jim showed the cops his tape, and I filed a complaint of assault under oath. A few hours later, Ross left the emergency room and went to the police station to file a complaint against me under oath. The whole episode came down to he said, and I ended up walking out of the courthouse unpunished. It's funny, not haha funny. I've believed in the win-win philosophy all my career. I'm always looking for a way in which both sides of the contract leave the room in a good mood. There is nothing win-win about divorce, at least nothing that I can point to. This is definitely a losing option, no matter how much you blame your cheating ex-spouse for this. It's been 2 years since that terrible day when I was sitting in that rented van. I had 24 wonderful years with the woman I loved with all my heart. I have 2 wonderful children, yes. I consider Jim a son, and now 2 grandchildren. Financially, I'm in great shape. Do you know how many men are deceived by the system and end up living in a studio apartment supporting a cheating ex-wife? Too much, but at least it's not my destiny. No, I have enough money to live comfortably and even travel. I am currently spending a month on a tour of Italy. He even participated in MotoGP races in Mugello. But when I sit and drink espresso outside a cafe in Florence, I have to hold back tears. Jane and I always said we'd do it together. We will tour Italy on a motorcycle without any deadlines and only with each other. Now I'm doing it without her. Jane is out of rehab, but still lives with her parents. Sarah and Jim allow her to visit her grandchildren for no more than an hour each month. I think Sarah is doing this as a form of torture. She still hasn't forgiven her mother. I am haunted by the question, how could she do this to us? Life is not a movie where the answers to every question are given before the credits. It's more like a Joseph Conrad novel. Life is just like that and often absurd, and the good guys don't always win. I finish my espresso, put my helmet back on, start the bike, and drive into my own heart of darkness. End.